It's not really about when, but just how.
Kickback in one word.
Generational.
Innovative.
Elevation.
Interview lighting is the fundamental skill of a cinematographer. But what if the conditions for the interview setup aren't ideal? Lights that you can't turn off, loud environments, and hectic schedules that are all out of your control. In this video, we're going to be showing you how we dealt with all these problems and what you can do so you don't make these simple mistakes on your next interview project. But make sure you watch the full video, as I will be letting you know my go-to method for creating beautiful catch lights in your subject's eyes. This was an interesting one when it came to this project because we were dealing with so many different things, and you can see that this is already an unideal interview setup. We are in a CBC building, which is an office building, and right now we are setting up our 8x8 diffusion frame, and then as well as our backdrop in the back there. We are using a lot of our internal gear, so we just have this 8x8 frame up on C-stands as well as some Cardi clamps, and then we are just rotating this into position. When you're setting up any of these frames, always set it up horizontal and then rotate it up into vertical. And a lot of you guys asked the question of where we got this backdrop from. And unfortunately, I can't just provide a link where we got this because this is a custom hand printed on canvas print. So you have to usually ask your local rental houses, art shops, art suppliers, and everything like that actually specifically rent out backdrops. It's just literally canvas print painted. Or if you want to take on something that yourself, you can do that too. Now we can go back into our lighting setup, and our main key light was a 1200D. And right now we are prepping this on a turtle base, and I had the plan that to use the turtle base because I didn't want to bring any combo stands or anything bigger than that. And I was going to be setting up a book light, so I didn't necessarily need the light pointing at something directly. And I forgot that the turtle base stands for newer base light stands aren't the same junior receiver, or that they just had a bunch of rust in them and we couldn't exactly fit it in. So what we did is we just put a bunch of force in it and it's just sitting on top there. But luckily later we had a stand, somebody pick up a stand for us and safely put this up. We were just using this for lighting reference, so don't come at us in the comments for any of this. Here we are working with a book light setup. And my biggest thing when I like to create a book light or any interview lighting is I like to make my source as big as possible. To light the backdrop, to light my subject, to light that everything is going on. And then you can see that we're utilizing the full 8x8 frame here. But as we start to dial in the look, we start to change this a little bit as well. Again, this turtle base stand is more than enough. I don't necessarily need to position my light anywhere. It's literally rotating it left to right to kind of kill the bounce output that we're dealing with. And the next light I like to set up in this interview setup, we can see that our lighting is coming together even in the BTS frames, is I'm booming in a tube light, which I love to use as a hair light. I don't like to use anything like a spotlight or anything too much like that because I don't like the look. I'm going for something that is a natural school photo, and that's why we use a tube light in that scenario. And the next thing that I'm setting up is a overhead bounce board to lift the ambience. A lot of big things that we were dealing with were a bunch of shadows that were being casted in a bunch of different places. I was originally going to use the 600D, but then we replaced this with the Forza 60B with a spotlight attachment, and this is me here just dialing in the levels. And then when we talk about actually how the production went, this was shot in a weird order because we were dealing with only 10-minute slots for 6 students. So we would shoot the interview, we would shoot some B-roll and get some different things. And then this is the B camera that we're using. We're pairing this with the Sony FX3 as well as this Venice. Because we're on an 85mm, it matches well. And then this is just us lens swapping. So generally the Venice does come with a PL mount, but because the Fujidon lens, the zoom lens that we're using is an E mount, we had to take that off completely. And I didn't want to do a big lens swap between everything. I just wanted to do a toolless lens swap because there's 6 screws that you have to take off the native PL mount. And then this is the B-roll section. And a lot of you guys asked another question is, how do you get these whips and transitions for your project? And specifically in this project, after shooting all this B-roll and interacting with the camera, as you can see here, I just take the camera and whip it around while they're doing actions, and Justin, the director, is just flashing the camera as well. And then now we're doing some of the B-roll shots, if you can see in my monitor there. 2 rounds of B-roll, 1 interacting with the camera and 2 with the zoom lens as they're posing for these school pictures. This was the whole creative around everything, and you can see that I don't even have the PL mount on there. And this is the swap between that. It's basically doing a toolless swap. Again, we only had 10 minutes, and to take off that mount and to put it back on would at least be 5 of those minutes. So we just didn't want any downtime, and this is just us working as quick as possible. So this is me going in and getting the B-roll of the actual talent, and then also getting some camera whips and transitions to use in the edit later. And I don't need an easy rig. I don't need to throw this on anything else. I'm holding the camera for literally a minute, and I was fine with doing that just tucked into my armpit there, and that was more than enough. And then you can see here we move into those fast kind of cuts, him smiling, and the whips and everything, which we do actually use in the edit. So whenever I like to shoot any scene, any commercial, I like to stop and even use sometimes the Sony FX3 to get those whips and transitions and those random movements, because I never know when I'm gonna use it. And for the edit, we actually use it a bunch of different times. All right, let's talk. If you're stuck doing low budget projects or don't know how to break into the commercial world, I've been there. It's tough when you know that you have the technical skills to execute something, but it feels like you're going nowhere. That's why we exactly created Cinematic Portfolio Mastery, an 8-week live program designed to help you build a portfolio that stands out and get you those high-paying clients that you've always been looking for. This isn't just another filmmaking course. This is a live experience with my team and I. Filmmakers who've executed on 6-figure projects as well as worked with clients such as the Raptors, Nike, and On. No fluff, just real, actionable strategies to help you plan, pitch, and execute top-tier commercial projects. By the end, you'll have a polished project, the skills to price your work, pitch confidently, and deliver projects that grab attention without needing a Hollywood budget. Check out the link in their description to enroll for our second cohort, which opens February 17th for just 2 weeks, but spots are limited. So let's break this down. As you guys saw, this isn't a heavy lighting setup. We have 3 lights in play, and the main thing that we're using here and utilizing is shaping light. That is the job as a cinematographer. So if I were to do a top down of exactly what we're dealing with, we have our A camera here and our B camera on the side, and then our massive 8x8 frame here. So this is my 8x8, and this is known as an art silk or an artificial silk. And this is just my go-to and what I've used, and I've talked to gaffers and like, yeah, you can use different things to get different effects and everything like that. But for the work that I'm doing for interview projects like this, for the run and gun commercials, I always use artificial silk because it's just my go-to. I don't have any problems with it. I don't need to achieve any different looks. If I level up my cinematography career, maybe I will start looking at different things and what they do, and when I have a project that calls for that. But for work I do, 90% of the time, I'm using artificial silk. And then to give you some realism and some perspective of what we're looking at, the bounce board is only taking up 4 feet of the artificial silk. And then we have our 1200D there. This is daylight balance, so this is sitting at 5600 Kelvin, and we only have this at 12%. So you could use a 300D, you could use any other source. We just had the 1200 because I was overpowering the lights that were overhead, and I just had that just in case. And then behind him, I have that hair light, and this is sitting at 100% as well as at 5600 Kelvin. And this is giving me that strong backlight that you can see here. But the biggest thing when it comes to interviews that I like to do is add contrast back into my image as well as a catch light. So let's talk about that contrast and what's that doing here. And we had those 2 4x8 floppies, and this is adding a bunch of negative fill back into his face as well as his body. Whenever you're trying to create something with interest, contrast is your best friend. And I'm trying to create something like a checkerboard of light and dark. His suit is dark here, and then it goes into light, and a little bit of dark, and a little bit dark here, and then heavily into that dark in here. And then the same thing happens with his face. And it's a constant repeating pattern, and that's what I'm always looking to do. And the little details really matter, and I feel like this is something that I would like to talk about because it took me so long to figure out how to get a proper catch light in your subject's eyes. And there's 2 ways to do this, and the way we did it in this one is just having a massive source. A catch light in a person's eyes is basically a reflection of what they see. If they're looking forward, their eyes are reflecting everything that is in front of them. So if I have a massive light source, anything like that, that is creeping towards the front, that is going to give me that catch light. In this case, I have a source here that has a grid on it and everything, but you don't necessarily see my eyes because it would have to be over here to give you that catch light that we're looking for. If you're trying to create this in your interview setups and this is something that you're struggling with, use a frame that's big. In this case, we're using an 8x, which is pretty unrealistic, but to give you more perspective, we're only using half of that. So 4 feet by 4 feet is usually enough, or even 4x6. Those are usually fast frames and stuff that you can use. But the main thing is bringing that almost not in front of your subject, so you have that side profile, so the light is hitting the side of their face and not necessarily the front. But you need some of that output in the front to reflect that going back. And then the second method, which is done in a lot of small commercials as well as a lot of narrative things to have that little twinkle in their eyes, is people literally putting a little light on their camera or even behind the camera. The point is to get that light source right in front of them, and not necessarily in their face, but even behind the camera, but to give you that reflection of what they're looking at. If I'm looking at the general camera's direction, and if I had like a little MC off to the side, that will give you your catch. So if you're struggling with catch lights, your biggest thing is get a bigger source that wraps around your subject a little bit more in the front, or to have a small light next to your camera, on your camera, or behind your camera that is in the general plane of where your subject is looking at. Then when we go into our B angle here, you can see that catch light even more. And if I were to zoom up on this, you can see that artificial silk frame. Obviously, it's not the same exposure of what we were looking at before, but it is the reflection of what's in their eyes. And then we can see that we have the nice fall off of what these lenses really provide, as well as providing soft lighting. We are taking a point source light. If I were to draw out what a book light actually is you're taking a basically light source that is this small, projecting it onto something that is bigger, and then that projects it onto something that is even big. When you're looking for soft light, you're not necessarily looking to stop it down as much as possible. What you're looking to do is spread it across a large area. That gives you this soft look and this fall off and this gradient that gives us a nice look when it comes to highlighting skin tones, making something like a beauty commercial, anything that you're trying to make the skin look as beautiful as possible. And then just adding negative fill into that to create that checkerboard of color. But the one thing I didn't really necessarily cover is the ambience that we brought in, because usually I like to bounce my light into a ceiling and bring it back into my subject to create more ambience. But in that case, if we were to draw like the perspective of this, if my subject is sitting here on this chair here, I have a bounce board flagged overhead, and that is bouncing the light back onto my subject to give me even more lift and some highlight into the top of the head and everything like that. The context of this project again was shooting school photos, so I really wanted to highlight that of almost the imperfections of lighting, because I would try to kill the reflections, especially on the head, and not have any shiny spots and move the head a little bit more. So it was just necessarily highlighting the hair. But I like these imperfections when it came to this of not being perfectly lit. And again, this is subjective of what you're doing, but I feel like we really did a good job of imitating what a school photo looks like for a video concept. The last thing I want to talk about is how you create more depth in your images, especially in some of these B-roll shots. And these were kids, and we're like, hey, can you do some poses that were like necessarily fun with the camera? And this was the one that gave us the most depth, because we have something in the foreground right here, which is this big shoe. And then he's reaching out and it gives you more context. And then something in the midground, which is him answering a shoe. And then nice backdrop in the background. So we have basically 3 layers that you're looking at right here. And this is how you build interest. And this was just me positioning myself as close to the first layer and then sniping kind of through that to give me what's revealed in the midground, and then having something in the background. So there's so much interest when it comes to creating images. And the main thing that I look at is contrast, color contrast, and then also placing things in my mid, foreground, and background. So this is just a combination of things, and those are the 3 things I like to do. And I feel like this image portrays it very well.